I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
Very compelling kind of a figure. Odd-looking duck. There's something about his eyes. Hypnotic.
A racist, a sexist, uncivil, worse than Hitler.
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddity.
This is the main thing about my listeners. They're masochists, and they listen to my show just for the pain.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
This idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse.
Once I establish my theocracy, I will throw you in my dungeon and let you rot for it.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
Doctor, turn off my cringe inhibitors.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy then.
Oh, my shrink was right. God does hate me.
You could bring civilization to Britain, but you could never bring Britain to civilization.
You globalist cock!
Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
This week we are joined once again by Ethan McGuire and Hannah Long, both regular contributors to The Dispatch and The Bulwark. And we've done multiple spoiler conversations with both of them in the past year about The Green Knight and The Northman. And now we're back to discuss what's probably the most over-discussed film of 2022 so far, that being Top Gun Maverick, which is a very weird sentence to say out loud. How are you guys feeling tonight?
Feeling good.
Feeling the need for speed.
I guess after seeing that movie, I actually just saw it for a second time at a drive-in the other day, and it wasn't quite as good at a drive-in as it was in IMAX, but I think that more or less speaks to kind of the flavor of the film, that being it's the kind of movie that's, you know, you're supposed to see it on the big screen, man, or it loses its experience. And if you see it anything less than that, it's a little off. But
drop my elite card here as a Brooklynite, and admit that I did see it on the biggest IMAX screen in North America. Just gonna drop it there. When I got out there in the first viewing, the levels of patriotism in my blood were just dangerous. It was just bleeding red, white, and blue. I was like, I want to join the Air Force. Now, yes, I wear glasses, and I can barely do 10 push-ups, but I could do this.
You see, the best way to watch it is clearly as Martin Scorsese would want you to, on your VR goggles headset. So,
True sentiment.
On your portrait mode.
Hold on, not even portrait mode, like vertical, not. It's even smaller.
Well, David Lynch would be the one having a heart attack if you did that.
Anyway, so with Top Gun Maverick, it's been drawing a lot of fascinating reviews in the past month and a week that's been out in theaters. It just crossed the $1 billion box office gross, which, holy crap. It's mostly critically acclaimed. Most people are pretty much on the it's not woke, therefore it's good train, which is not a high bar. But when it kind of comes to like the political analysis side, there's a little bit more disappointment, I think, with it. Ethan, who's I don't want to ascribe political beliefs to him, more or less kind of found it to be somewhat. In his review for Dispatch, kind of accused it of being somewhat sexless and lacking any sort of meaningful depth. And I believe his quote was, 2022's Maverick will be remembered as the feminine answer to 1986's Top Gun. Hannah was a little bit more nice to it, joining the bunches theory, basically saying that it's a metaphor for purgatory, and that it's ultimately about a character kind of being stuck in his late stage. I get not adolescence, but just kind of being trapped in a place and kind of on being able to move on. And I was a little bit more on the in-between side. I said it was fairly sterile and timid at times and completely politically disinterested, which makes some of its creative choices absolutely hilarious. I don't know if there's a place where we're necessarily going to disagree here, because it seems like we all liked the film. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to say Ethan is clearly a communist here. But I think we actually probably will largely agree on those terms. That I was thinking about it and thinking, I think a lot of the differences in conclusion that you come to are just about which moments of emphasis matter the most to you in the film.
Yeah.
And there are a few key ones that manage to nudge me away from Ethan's arguments, which I would otherwise be sympathetic to. And I am in general largely sympathetic to the idea of a more sterile, more modern, more sexless Hollywood, which is just it definitely feels like it's within the broader trends there.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think what holds this thing together is the fact that it's coming out during Tom Cruise's best phase of his entire career, and at the moment he just seems to be not capable of doing anything creatively bad, at least for this particular small window of time where, he's got 2 masterpiece Mission Impossible films on on either side of him at the moment, so it's really hard to be like, oh, he's in a bad spot. No, he's throwing his body out there every single time he makes one of these movies. I'm pretty sure he's in the cockpit of the F-18s of every single one of those shots, and I have no idea how they managed that. But it's perfect as an action movie, but it definitely seems to be it's like Hannah said, if depending on how you interpret some of the individual lines, is the degree to which you're kind of going to get anything out of Top Gun Maverick other than just it being an action movie. I pulled a whole bunch of miscellaneous quotes I found from people complaining about it. Everything from Film Crit Hulk complaining that there's not enough homosexuality in the film to Michael Anton complaining that it's a boomer wet dream. It just seems to be bringing out the weird reactions all across the board.
Well, I think it's kind of a litmus test. I think Armand White in his review of it called it a test of some sort. And of course, you'd have to interpret what he means by that. So that's something for a different conversation. But yeah, I definitely agree. It seems like the critical... It's mostly critically acclaimed. I don't know what it has on Rotten Tomatoes, but I think it's quite high, isn't it?
I didn't check, but I can now, just as a curiosity, so...
But, yeah. I mean, I liked it a lot. But there are just some nitpicks I have with certain thematic issues I found with it.
Well, I think that's why that's more or less the same conclusion I came to in my review for the New York Sun. I mean, it's a movie that definitely feels like it can't exist outside of its particular political moment. Even if you want to set aside the quote unquote woke politics, it's like I said, it's very sterile and timid, and you get the sense that the movie, even politically, the movie is just trying so hard not to step on any toes. And the first movie, in the original movie, you could kind of tell the bad guys are supposed to be either the Soviets or the Chinese, and they just kind of couldn't say it out loud because they didn't want to spark a war. But in this one, it's complete. You don't know who the bad guys are at all. You don't see their faces. They're somehow extremely rich and extremely poor, and they can afford nuclear weapons development, but they're not Iran. It's not Iran. It's not North Korea. It's just okay, we're going to go to war against someone. I don't know what to do with that. You know what I mean?
I did read a quote from Cruise the other day, and it was from an interview that was made maybe around 10 years after the original Top Gun. And they were talking about how it was sort of an ad for the U.S. military, and Cruise said, yeah, well, if I felt like we were actually teaching kids that this is what war was like, then that would, I would have more problems with it. He's like, that this is very much a fantasy. He's like, and that's why he's like, I think it would have been irresponsible to turn it into a franchise. Top Gun 2, Top Gun 3, which I thought was an interesting glimpse into what he saw as the purpose of the film. Though of course he was 20 years old when he made the first one. So the fact that he's speaking with these grand pronouncements about the purpose of the franchise, just, I mean, he's Tom Cruise, though. I guess he did. Tom Cruise.
Yeah, I pulled up that quote. It's from Playboy, although it apparently was buried for the better part of a while. But yeah, he was pretty much disputing the idea that you're supposed to read Top Gun as a right-wing power fantasy, which I think is probably accurate, because I don't think Top Gun can reasonably read to have a coherent idea or ideology within it, at least the original one.
a left-wing power fantasy. To be fair,
Yeah.
I've been kind of surprised that some of the left-wing critiques of Top Gun Maverick haven't caught hold. I think it's just that the thing is so damn entertaining.
Yeah.
And one thing that I tweeted right after the movie came out was that it appeals equally to the two halves of my nature, which is to say the Appalachian blue-collar right-wing half and the fancy-smancy Brooklynite half. So, like, the first part is just flags and jets and, just absolute traditionalism and killing the enemy and America is good and just all this, sheer levels of patriotism and all of those things. But then on the other hand, it really is sort of a triumph for art in a blockbuster market. And that doesn't necessarily mean that this is the next Terrence Malick movie. I mean, it clearly isn't. It is a blockbuster movie, and it does adhere to some of the rules of the blockbuster craze now, but it does so many simple things competently that I hand it probably way more credit than it deserves for that. I at the same time, I do think that its message of responsibility and of reflection and of personal growth seems like too irreligious a term almost, because there is a sense of death and of meaning that hangs over the film that makes this about more than just Maverick reading a self-help book. Like, he is confronting a man, Iceman, who has lived a life that's been very different from his, and who is dying and who is facing very real consequences. And of course, Val Kilmer's real life struggles really just kind of play out in the screen, underlining that. I thought they handled that very gracefully. And so that there seems to be a sense of seriousness and a sense of purpose and a sense of moral questioning and of moral that it is asking the characters to make decisions about things that are not trivial. It is calling them to move out of the trivial space. And all of those things, I mean, partly it's just the last movie I saw in theaters was Doctor Strange, and I came out of it so frustrated with Marvel's editing and all these things. I was very much a stick in the mud about it, that just seeing a movie attempt to tell a story about these serious moral themes in a way that wasn't crass or unnecessarily crude. I mean, it feels like most of the time, if someone wants to tell an adult story, they try and tell it in an ugly way to prove that they are serious, that there's sort of this thematic urge to broadcast one's own adultness by having very ugly, very graphic things on screen, which I think has a lot to say about the way we think about art now, as opposed to thinking that you can tell an adult story that is also aesthetically beautiful, that tells you the truth in ways that are not just trying to disrupt or deconstruct something, and that you can do that in a way that is mature and that is interesting. And so anyway, this is the Top Gun Roger Scruton would have made.
That's one heck of a pull quote right there. But in regards to the quality, I don't know if I'd say the film is necessarily like a great film in and of itself. Like my colleague Sarah Harjett had a good quote when she said, it's a high quality summer blockbuster in a film scene that hasn't had a high quality summer blockbuster since Mad Max Fury Road. Like we were in a desert of like spectacle and clarity that's actual spectacle and clarity. Like, we don't have the old style Top Gun where, a movie will spend $100 million on actual Navy jets just to have a really cool movie. And, this is the first time in a while we've actually gotten that spectacle back where, there's still practical effects films made nowadays, but it feels a lot rarer. And like nothing in a Marvel movie where everything is CGI is going to have as much effectiveness as seeing Tom Cruise fly a jet between two other jets and watch the pilots freak out in real time. But You, Ethan, you compared it to Marvel in some way, in a negative sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna let you take over from that line of thought.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I called it the Marvel movie for dads, because I live down in the deep south here in Florida, and I went to see it with a bunch of the dads in my church small group, actually. And so, I got a good perspective on a lot of the audience. I think that is probably most happy with the movie, and maybe some of the audience that is helping propel it to that $1 billion. It's an audience that doesn't really feel reached anymore by blockbusters a lot of the time. Because you get the Marvel movies, which are basically for kids, although lots of adults watch them, of course. But, they're basically for teenagers, basically. And so, a more, thoughtful adult person who isn't necessarily into any kind of art movies is going to, they loved a lot of those kind of 90s movies. When we were sitting in the theater, one of my dad friends leaned over to me and he's like, I'd rather watch this than any of the Marvel movies. And and they all loved it. And when we were in the theater, the new Mission Impossible trailer came on, and the whole theater cheered, and they cheered. We all cheered, of course, because Tom Cruise it's kind of like the last movie star, it seems like. Especially the last action movie star. And the movie is very competently made, like you and Hannah are saying. But I also agree with Hannah in that it is a little more than just entertainment. I mean, I think that we should take Tom Cruise seriously. I think that in his movies, obviously, he's the producer of pretty much all of his movies, if not all of them these days. And I think that he seems like a very serious person when it comes to political and philosophical thoughts in his films. And I think that he loves to make entertaining movies, but he also always underlies them with some kind of serious moral question, or like the things you might find in Edge of Tomorrow, or even a lot of the Mission Impossible movies, actually. So, I mean, a lot of people have said this is just entertainment. One of my good friends on Twitter was talking about it really thoughtfully, but at the end of what he was talking about on Twitter, he's like, this is not art, it's entertainment. And I kind of disagree with that to a certain extent, because even though this may have seemed like something normal when it came out, if it had come out in the 80s or the 90s, like the original Top Gun did, when it comes out in the environment we have now, there is something very artful to the way, real planes are used, like you were saying, the emphasis on having the actors put into small amounts of danger, to be actually into planes a lot of times, and be their own cinematographers and makeup artists. As I forget who linked an article to that. It might have been Hannah on Twitter, but somebody did. So I do think there are certain political and philosophical questions that Tom Cruise puts in his movies that we should take more than just at face value. And I thought it was a super entertaining movie. I loved it. And actually, when I got out of it, what I was thinking about, I was like, an argument could really be made for this movie making a case for conservatism in certain regards, especially in the regard of, needing to keep, in the age of drones, needing to keep real pilots around, fatherhood, men being men, having both masculine and feminine virtues in a society, things like that. But I think the three things that probably bothered me most about it, not bothered me as in I'm losing sleep over it, but
if we're gonna take it morally seriously, I wonder the degree to which we need to bring up the fact that Tom Cruise is the space pope. But because it seems like the movies are, it kind of feels like his action movies are kind of trying to make you not think about that. But it's like you said, these movies do invite some level of philosophical criticism. But
I think the biggest problem I had with it, and the reason I wrote my piece for Titus Teixeira's Substack, Postmodern Conservative, is that it represents a war without sacrifice, in my opinion. And I know that you could say, well, they have to put themselves... it's not a war without risk, and I do appreciate that. It seems like a lot of movies and our whole culture is very risk averse. And the movie is definitely a commendation of risk. So I appreciate that a lot. But it's almost, in my opinion, sacrifice averse. Because I feel like in the original Top Gun, Goose's death, is really treated almost like a sacrifice, and I really just did not feel that in this movie. I felt like it was treated as a terrible, terrible accident that should be absolutely avoided at any cost, and Tom Cruise, superhuman Tom Cruise, is going to save you from any kind of accident that might happen, and also he's not going to die in the process either. Obviously, there is death. I think maybe I might have overstated it in my review saying that it's a deathless war. Obviously, the death of Iceman looms large over it. Mortality looms large over it. Maverick having to face his own mortality definitely is a big part of it. And those are all really good themes. But I just think that having a war movie without any kind of representation of sacrifice is going to be a little bit empty from the way I see it. Then there's just the problem, obviously. I think that probably what divides a lot of conservatives these days of policing the world or globalism. And, I tend to lean much more against it overall. And so that part does kind of rub me in the wrong way in a certain aspect, although not in the way that a lot of more liberal critiques of it have said. Just in the way of, why can't you show who the enemy is? That seems like a little bit of a cowardly move to me. Now, I understand they want it to be a worldwide success, and it is a worldwide success, and probably all of the choices that Tom Cruise and the director and all the filmmakers made probably are what caused it to be Tom Cruise's biggest movie. But I do think if we take it at a little more than face value, we do have to think a little bit about how it misrepresents globalism and how it misrepresents sacrifice. And then overall, I just found it, like I said, to be a little bit sexless. That has a lot to do with the Marvel problem. That's part of why I compared it to Marvel. I think that the original probably partially unintentionally really represents well how men compete with each other. And I know a lot of people have read it as a homosexual fantasy, and I can see where they get that, but Tony Scott, the director, did not intend that at all. And Jerry Bruckheimer, the producer, I think, was on the movie.
No, the funny thing
they
is
did not intend that.
It's funny because I remember Film Crit Hall complained about that in his review, and as I read that, I realized if Tom Cruise had actually leaned into that, he would have to deal with another decade of Tom Cruise in the closet jokes. And he's not gonna frigging do that. He's not going to handle another South Park fudge packer joke.
I understand that.
I mean, it would be funny. I would benefit from this as a real thing that existed, but he's not going to put up with that. So that was never going to be an option on the table. They're going to bring in Jennifer Connelly to be the love interest, which actually she does a good job at. But
I thought you were beard.
What's that?
I thought you said you were going to bring her in to be the beard.
Jennifer Connelly is a beard. That sounds like a South Park joke. But in regards to the globalism thing, it's interesting because obviously if you're making a movie with military assets, you have to do it with the full benefit of the U.S. Armed Forces approval, which means you do not get to depict it in any way negatively at all, ever. So
yeah. But in the original, it was more of a defense aspect.
Yeah, but it also, coming out when it did definitely helped it because, in the 1980s, there was a clear sense of a multipolar world order where if you had a bad guy in a movie, you could at least subtextually understand who that's supposed to be and what it's supposed to mean. And you can read all sorts of subtext in the Top Gun that wasn't intended. And that's why it has the reputation of being the pro-military, pro-American film, even though it's really not intended that way as a reading. It's the same reason why it's read as conservative in the same way it's read as gay. It's an unintentional effect of the film, the way the film is presented. But at the same time, with the new one, it feels so much more sterile because it still has to do the pro Air Force, but it doesn't have a clear sense of what that means in our current world, where where there are more people that are at least a little bit more bitter about U.S. military engagements, and without the clear sense of enemy, you can't really contextualize it in a way that feels justified.
It definitely feels like a movie that doesn't have any real ability to glom onto a real life foreign policy situation and say this is clearly what this is about. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say this is clearly about Iran, which Yeah, I mean, it could be Tom Cruise's big argument for why the Iran deal is a mistake. Which,
I didn't think of that.
Some of the decisions that have been made on that recently, I think Maverick is clearly correct, but
I don't think Iran has snow-capped mountains and lush forests, at least not by the coast.
Maybe. I mean, there's definitely some mountainous regions inland about snow-capped. I myself lean a little bit more neocon, so
This is a war about going to war with Tibet.
So I'm a little bit more sympathetic and/or just able to forgive the film's warmongering as a warmonger.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying I personally I'm not against warmongering in the right context. It just I need there to be a story behind it. You know, it's not. It's like
I know. Well, I would just say temperamentally, I'm more sympathetic to a story in which America goes out and is good because America.
Oh yeah.
But I do understand I think that I would have been much happier with the movie if it had put a face to the enemy as well. I don't think that it is a huge flaw because the focus of the story is so much less on war qua war. It's not really about the effects of war or the effects of what war does to people, what war does to the people fighting it, and to the people being fought. That really just isn't a focus in the movie at all. It's so much more focused on the sort of crucible of moral choices that this scenario has forced people to make. And none of those choices have to do with whether or not it's good to kill the enemy. Which, to be fair, I think is like probably most actual soldiers going out there. They're thinking much more about the sorts of decisions that you have to make. Like, am I the sort of person who is able to sacrifice people younger than me?
Yeah.
And I think that there is certainly an argument that could be made that the generals of the American military are way too willing to do that. And we shouldn't glamorize someone learning to do that in the course of the movie. But I think that within the context of the movie, you do have unfailing generals who do just see the soldiers that they are sending into the field as cogs in the machine. And then you have Maverick, who is somewhere in between those extremes. He is someone who, a big goal for him is to protect his soldiers, is to come up with a way for them to get out. And that is viewed as, on the surface, a strength. But as you look throughout the movie, it's also his greatest weakness. And I think that's a very interesting tension throughout the film, is that it's sort of the source of his immaturity, but it's the source as well of his value as a leader and a teacher for these kids, is that he is someone, I would put it this way, is that he is, at the beginning of the film, he's like the big brother. He's the really cool kid who doesn't really want the responsibility of being in command. But he is also not general material. He is captain, and he is what he wants to be, and what he ultimately becomes at the end of the story is a father, which is a different thing than a general, and a different thing than a big brother. Is that he is able to kind of hit a happy medium between those things, because he is, and I don't think that it's making a plausible case that this is a sustainable role within the U.S. military. That, like, you know, if you have a father relationship with your soldiers, then you're not really going to be able to make the calls that you need to.
No, I mean, this isn't Sans of Iwo Jima, so yeah.
Yeah. And I would argue, I think it's pretty clear that he's not going to be in the military anymore after the end of the film, right?
Which I think is important. I agree with that. I've heard arguments, and to go back to your first point, I was trying to formulate an answer to each one of the 3 points, but the first one about sacrifice is it did occur to me to think, would this have been a stronger movie if Maverick had gotten killed off in the scene in which he seems to have gotten killed off? Because the first time I saw it, there is a sense throughout the film that anyone could go, because it's not a franchise film. It is a film which seems like it's about mortality and all of these things. And I think the reason that I inclined against it is that it, for one thing, it would have been difficult to do because he was the point of view character, and if you remove him, then suddenly you have to transition to other people, and so the movie is about his moral arc, but it's also about him coming back from the sky. It's about him landing. It's about him not being. If he had died in that moment, I think that he would have died with an incomplete arc, without having had the ability to let go of his military service, which is really kind of an important part of his arc in the course of the film. I'm not unsympathetic to the thought that there should have been more real sacrifice throughout it. I think there were a few scenes which gave it a real shot in the arm as far as physical risk goes. But if you really drilled it down into anything, which character really gives up something meaningful in the story? That's tougher to actually nail down. But I mean, I think there's so much going on. I also just really appreciate the fact that the ending is almost catastrophic in its joy. It's just bursting with this sense of, like, I was just kind of, it's ecstatic. It's an ecstatic, not just, oh, it's a happy ending.
I mean, it's almost like heavenly. Like, it kind of plays into the Bunch of Street, where you could read the Mach 10 sequences, him dying, and the rest of the film is him trapped in that place where he has to learn to overcome himself and, wind up in the happiest possible place where he has his airplane and family.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not a literal Bunches fan.
Are there real Bunches out there other than, like, the one guy? I don't know.
I'm not convinced Honey is really a real Bunches.
I think there is some.
There's something down in his soul is true, but it's hard to tell sometimes. But yeah, I think that those sorts of the funny thing about that sort of theory is that it's so often sort of a Reddit level, like,
oh yeah
puzzle thing. If you add this number and you add this number, but I think that the nice thing about Bunch's theory in this particular instance is that it's actually capturing an emotional tone in the movie that there isn't any internal explanation for. Is that the way in which Maverick goes to Mach 10 and then lands does feel mysterious, and it does feel providential, and the ways in which the movie sets it up, the way it's shot, the way the dialogue is set up around it, the way in which it explicitly, as he is coming up to Mach 10, he is speaking to a friend who is dead. Goose is that, he's saying, Obi-Wan, tell me. I mean, it does somewhat weaken the film that it just blatantly plagiarizes Star Wars, but I'm not going to think about that.
It's the trench run, but 3 times harder. It's really funny. It's like a funny aspect to that, but
me at all on the first viewing, and I'm really embarrassed. On the second one, I was just, but it was very obvious. But I think that sort of the Bunch theory, which is that Tom Cruise is in purgatory throughout, and he is this enlightenment or this moral breakthrough moment. It does sort of explain the emotional and the just the tonal choices at certain moments. It also helps smooth out some of the cognitive dissonance between the fact that film is so unreal, and it is slightly sterile, and it is slightly just like fantastical. It is a bit of a boomer fantasy. I mean,
Gen X maybe. Is it a Gen X fantasy though, instead of a boomer fantasy?
We're trying to, let's not square that circle. We only have 2 minutes left.
Look it up. Tom Cruise is a boomer, and I'm still not over this. He just got in, but so all of those things, and I think that's another reason why it is easier for me to accept the fact that the movie is quite sexless, is because I'm like, look, if it is a movie from a dad, or even in his case, really a granddad's perspective, I don't want a sex scene with that. I'm just saying.
It's Tom Cruise, though. and Jennifer
no,
Connelly.
that
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Doesn't help.
It's like watching your parents. It's like, no, you know what? If this movie was from Rooster's perspective, then I think that would be a much more.
That's true.
But I think that's also a potential critique, which is that we now make movies from the perspective of the dad.
Yeah.
All right, moving on from Tom Cruise's sex scenes. What else did we want to touch upon with the film beyond that?
I will say that before we completely move on from that, after the non-existent sex scene, I think is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, where they suddenly realize that Penny's daughter has come home, and it sets off a great series of comic incidents, which again I think really underlines one important difference between this and the earlier movie, which is that while it is true that the earlier movie had a much greater sense of eroticism, it also had a sense of like that there was much less sense of the actual consequences of sex.
That's true.
And this is a movie that is there is no sex, but it's all about the consequences. There's a happy movie out there that has both, but this one has the second one. But again, I'm pretty happy with that, because I'm like, I didn't need a Tom Cruise Jennifer Connelly scene in my life. For people, but it's too weird for me. I would need therapy. So, but what I mean is that the importance of the daughter in that storyline keeps coming back. It keeps being underlined. I have a friend who was complaining about the movie because he thought that it didn't do enough to really kind of hold Maverick's feet to the fire as far as like abandoning a young girl who did not have a father figure. A few years ago, apparently he'd had a fling, had left, and it seems unclear at that point whether the girl was old enough to really understand what was happening, or at least I think almost it was that she was so young that he didn't comprehend her. And now she is on the age of adulthood, and he suddenly does have to comprehend her. And of course, she was old enough to understand it, and you understand that from the way that she reacts. And she has seen what it's done to her mother being abandoned.
Yeah.
And she has a sense of seriousness and maturity that, in a way, neither her mother nor Maverick have. That she's the character who is getting the grades, who's focused on her homework, who's all of these things. And I don't think it's meant to portray her as someone who is joyless, but as someone who is sort of a character contrast between these people. And so when she turns up and they both sit up in bed, it's a very funny moment, because they're suddenly it's all teenagers. And then he has to jump out the window, and he makes this grandiose promise: "I will never leave you again." And it's very touching, and we're touched by it, and we assume he's telling the truth, but it's at the same time we're not taking this very seriously. It's a grandiose gesture, and then he falls out the window. It's hilarious. The girl sees him, and she says, "Don't break her heart again." And suddenly, it's not a grandiose gesture anymore. Suddenly, like because we see what it cost her, that she is not taking this as a sort of funny, silly thing, that there is going to be a cost if he doesn't come back. So that I think is if that storyline hadn't existed, I think that the movie not killing Maverick would have been a problem. But I think that that does a great deal to offset that, and it really does complete his arc in a very important way. And I think that just having, someone else had pointed out that near the end of the movie, he comes to look for Penny in the bar, and he does not find her, which seems like an unnecessary narrative obstacle to him being with her. But what's important is that she does come to him, but she comes to him, and the shot in which we see her arrive, we don't see her first. We see her daughter, and she meets his eyes, and then she nods like she is giving him permission. It's like she has to give him permission to court her mother, which I think was, again, a very interesting sort of inversion. And it could be sentimental in a certain light, but I think that actually what it does is it underlines how fragile children are, how important it is that you care about the kids when you are, wanting to do your mixed family. And he is someone who is not he doesn't think. I mean, that's his whole motto is don't think, just do. And that is forcing him to keep his feet on the ground in a very important way, because she exists. It's not just a fling with Penny. It's not just a boomer fantasy of a beautiful woman with a Porsche, though maybe a little bit. But her existence, I think, really anchors that storyline in an important way. And so that's anyway. That's my
No, I have some thoughts on that too, and I really appreciate everything you're drawing out about that, and I recognize that in it too. I think the way his relationship with her is handled fairly well, and there are two moments with her and him that I really liked, and that was the one where she's teaching him how to sail, because really attaching the necessity of sailing with the Navy and the history of sailing. That's a really good visual way to anchor everything, the history of sailing, and then coming into flying in the future, and then still remaining a necessity for sailing, and kind of helping, if you've seen the arguments in the movie, that all kind of helps all that out and adds a really good visual illustration too. So, and then the part with her basically chastising him for giving up, which I mentioned in my review as well. I really like that. In my review, I mentioned that it just kind of reminds you of the many stories of the Spartan mothers telling their sons to get back into battle, or the various other crude ways that history tells us as well. So I really saw that. Those were two scenes I really liked, as well as the whole storyline with the daughter. Also, kind of the him seeing the daughter first kind of underlines him being a father at that point. So I liked all of that. The whole point about eroticism in it, and the reason I mentioned that in my review, I kind of wish I'd gotten the chance to flesh it out, but I didn't want to dwell on it too long. And that just is that, because a lot of people, anytime you have anything that is anywhere erotic with men, it's always read as homosexual. Any old movie with it is read as homosexual. We know from interviews that Tony Scott did not mean that, at least as far as he says, and I think we can understand that he did not mean that to be gay. But what it does bring out, and something that is kind of missing from our culture at the moment, is there's a certain aspect of eroticism that can be represented visually that is really illustrative of the fact that men are competitive with each other for sexual sexual reasons, not that they're attracted to each other in a sexual way, but it's kind of dismissed nowadays as like dick measuring contest or toxic masculinity. And kind of my complaint of it is that the movie doesn't really offer us anything in its stead. It doesn't offer us any reason not to read that kind of earlier scenes in the original as anything but toxic masculinity. The only scenes of competition, in my opinion, that we really see in the movie could be read as toxic masculinity almost, with just them being upset at each other, and Hangman basically just twisting the knife in about his father. When you had Iceman and Maverick, they weren't making insults about each other's past friends or parents or anything like that. It was competition. And the reason it's erotic is because there is a sexual factor to their competition. Not that they're attracted to each other, but that's just an inherent natural thing. So I wish that was more in movies nowadays, and it's probably why I missed it in this one. So I just want to make that point clear about why I would miss eroticism, because I think a lot of conservatives would say that it's a good thing that it doesn't have that.
Well, I am glad you fleshed that out. No, it's no, I think that's a very good point, and I think that from a kind of going back to the whole idea of like the female and the male perspective, that from a female perspective, that also adds an element of danger to men. Is that mixed up with this sexuality is this sense of threat, and it also ties in somewhat to what you're saying about the ability to kill. That this is not a movie in which the mission is to go kill people. The mission is to go blow up a thing. And kind of like as you sort of snip the threads between all of those things, you start to lose an essential logic of human nature and of all of those things that are tied into it. So yeah, no, I definitely think that that there's a good point to be made there, and that you were making it, and it's I think that is definitely something on reflection. The way in which Iceman and Rooster and Maverick all kind of interact, that there does seem like there's a lack of respect for the value of competition to make you better. That it just seems like it's an obstacle for the characters, which, to be fair, when you have a bunch of egos in a very short span of time and you need to make a team, then in that particular like, maybe you don't have time for everybody to go on a life-changing journey of discovery, but and I say this as someone who's like, has to think a lot about managing time and people, and like, I mean, I don't manage people, but like, dealing with people in lots of situations with deadlines, and dealing with teams of people when we need to get a project across the finish line. And so it is a matter of like, I think I sympathized with Maverick as he was just thinking, how do I just get these people to work together?
Yeah.
But yeah, in a very short period of time. And it was extremely funny, sort of like movie shorthand, that the solution is, let's just go play sexy football for a little while. It doesn't really make sense, but I'm here for it. I mean, it's just, that was very corny, but I think in its corniness, everybody just sort of like laughed their way to the next play.
Well, it reminded me of any kind of corporation. Leaders always want to put you out on some kind of competitive retreat, and the way they frame it never really like helps unless that is already in place naturally. Yeah.
One who's part of a big corporation, no comment.
Same.
It is, well, actually, in publishing, it's mostly women, so it's a different dynamic, I guess.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying about the danger that kind of sexuality represents, because that's something that was really present to the 60s to the 80s, and then never addressed, really. And now it's kind of turned into a sexlessness. But I wish we know a different way forward. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
I agree. And that wasn't a criticism necessarily. I think that it's just trying why I think Hollywood has responded to, because you do have sort of these yin and yang situations where like you have the danger without any of the reckoning with the consequences of that danger misused.
Right.
But then this movie is just kind of all about the consequences, though it's also like the most joyful movie about consequences that I've seen in years.
True.
Like, it is deconstructing Maverick in a very mild sort of way.
Yeah.
Deconstructing him in the most conservative manner possible. It's just saying, wow, you are not conservative enough.
It's the kind of deconstruction I like.
Exactly. That's the best sort of deconstruction. It's reconstruction. He is a whole man in the way that he was at the beginning of the movie near the end. Someone who is grounded in the best sorts of ways. And I do just come back to that sort of ecstatic final scene, which I don't think necessarily needs to be even literal heaven within the context of the movie for it to be something that just makes me so happy that the reason we the audience are happy is that all of the characters have done the right thing. That it isn't this rejoicing of people, of a father and son united, of this that Rooster has kind of come into his own. Maverick has been able to let go, but he's also kind of gotten to go out on a high. Like, that's kind of the thing too, is that he does pass the baton on somewhat, but like it lets him have that moment. And I was happy with that. Like, you know, I'm like, you know, that there's so many movies now that are about like killing or destroying what came before, or, you know, deconstructing it to such an extent. I feel like Luke Skywalker's final scene felt like a pale shadow in a certain way of what came before. He gets a heroic. He doesn't get a heroic send off. He gets a like he's holding off on an army while everyone else retreats, and it feels like a retreat. It feels like he is just keeping them from defeat as opposed to actually winning, which I think is an important distinction. Is that, and I say this as someone who generally kind of enjoyed The Last Jedi, but like that there is a real lack of optimism or hope in that sort of ending. And this one, while it does sort of hedge its bets about the actual possibility of physical pilots to keep being a thing in the military, drone warfare is coming, and the movie knows that. It also wants people like Maverick. There's a great sense of gratitude to those people. There's not a sense that we should hate them or that they made everything bad, but that despite their flaws, we really want them to have happy endings, and we should want them to have happy endings. And that's just, you know, that's a nice feeling. I think it feels very counterintuitive to a lot of movies. It's a very conservative approach to thinking about icons and legends in history.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really like what you're saying about deconstruction needs reconstruction, and we get that from Maverick, and of course he is the main character, so that's a good thing. I wondered if we really get that, how much we are really getting that for Rooster though in the story, because of course now he has a kind of a father figure, but the movie doesn't really give young people any kind of way forward. It gives older people who are dealing with issues that they never addressed a way forward, sure, almost a kind of therapy, which I tried to draw out a little bit in my review. But what exactly is the path for young people to go on? And I think that's to get a superhero Tom Cruise dad.
It's a boomer fantasy. They don't have a plan for the youth.
So it's conservative in a lot of ways, but it's almost a
true.
Conservatives are dying. Here's how you can cope with that. Almost.
Yeah. Someone made the point, I can't remember who, that Glenn Powell has much more charisma than Miles Teller, and that Cruise couldn't. And so that, like, you know, if they had swapped roles, I think Cruise would have actually had to deal with someone who was as charismatic as he is. That would have been an interesting movie. I'm not sure I would have been happy with it, because I'm happy with Cruise taking the spotlight. You know, again, like there's so many things where I'm like, okay, that would have been an interesting other movie, but this one makes me so happy. But I think there is a lack of a vision for the future there, and it's partly just being realistic about the way in which the army is going. But it is also from a Tom Cruise-y character's perspective. If it had been from Rooster's perspective, maybe different. But I think there were a few key moments that were helpful on that front, which is that the moment when Rooster goes really fast, that made me so happy, because I think that's just such the role of fathers in a kid's life. So I grew up in a very small town, and the horizon of possibilities in that town just did not seem to be terribly wide. And I enjoyed writing, but I didn't have any frame of reference for whether or not I could do it professionally. And I assumed I could not, because no one from rural Retreat, Virginia ever went anywhere like that. Or it was just, I didn't know anybody. None of my family have liberal arts degrees. My dad could tell I could do something, you know, like I don't know how much or how clear an idea that was, but he would not let me settle when I wanted to settle and when I wanted to just coast. And I don't mean that I think that there are a lot of people who, trope-wise, now there's a lot of criticism for like an over-pushy father figure, or that, you know, you push me beyond my limits and all these things. Well, that is what dads do, is they do push beyond your limits, is that I would not be an editor at HarperCollins at 26 if my dad had not pushed me to do this. Like, I mean, it's like Eric Liddell says in Chariots of Fire. You know, for me, when I edit, when I write, I feel God's pleasure. Like, this is what I was made to do. But it's also risky. It's something that, like, you know, I've moved hundreds of miles from my home. Well, what was my home? Like, that I moved somewhere I didn't have any family in the middle of the winter in January of 2019. And, like, just those sorts of, like, achievements, which are very focused on glory, very male trope wise, like, those are things that fathers gift to children. My mom, I love my mom. She's terrific, and she has given me so many other things in life, like, you know, my ability to communicate with people, my ability to be just, like, very Southern friendly at people. Like, but my dad, she would never have, like, pushed me to do these things. So, like, you know, not to universalize my own parents, but that definitely feels like an experience that I have heard other young women, and probably, I would imagine, young men have with their dads as well. Yeah. So, just to quickly say is that I think in a movie that was more sympathetic to the very, very common now Hollywood female point of view, he would have, you know, responded to Rooster going fast with, "Are your training wheels on? Are you okay?
That's
Are
true.
you wearing your helmet? Are you wearing your helmet? Are you okay?" Like, I love that was a moment of joy in the movie, is that, like, he doesn't just go fast, he goes too fast, and people rebuke him for that, and then Maverick praises him for it. That was a really nice little dynamic there of, like, you know, he's like, yes, this is what you need to do. This is what you needed to do. So.
Yeah, I like that element of risk. I mean, I did have a lot of problems with the element of sacrifice as represented in the movie, but the element of risk, I think, is present. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Is there any other topics we want to tackle with this? Because it feels like we hit a lot in terms of what this film is really kind of digging into in terms of its place in the culture and how much it's actually able to accomplish with what it has. Like, I don't like again, none of us have any serious critiques of it that really go beyond its, you know, the side effects of just being a modern film, which, you know, you try to do some of the original Top Gun-y things, or with maybe make it more overt, it probably would actually be too controversial to get released. I mean, it didn't get. I don't think it got released in China because they kept the Taiwan patch in. So it's, yeah, exactly. I was proud of them for that, but they made it to $1 billion, and they made it to $1 billion anyway. So go figure.
Yeah, I mean, this movie's a big win for Tom Cruise. I mean, I think that even with the criticisms I might have, the things about the movie, just about everything about the movie, I think is the reason it is as successful as it is. Now, there are a lot of things about the movie that make me prefer, you know, some of the Mission Impossible movies to it. But yeah, I mean, there's just a good combination of elements to make it Tom Cruise's biggest movie. I mean, for me, you know, the things that would have fixed it would be the enemies having faces and language. I think someone should have got hurt in training. More equipment should have been destroyed in training, I think. I think that Hangman should have died saving Maverick and Rooster. I think that would have taken care of some of my sacrifice complaints. And then the Star Wars plot points. I believe that Tom Cruise is serious about his thoughts making the movie. I don't know how serious the screenwriters are, because their wit definitely suffers when you have these so blatant, like, Star Wars elements. That makes it a little bit silly, and it's kind of hard to ignore. But
it's the same.
Those are some.
It's the same screenwriter as the Mission Impossible movies, so I'd say it.
Yeah, but those are Tom Cruise. Those are all Tom Cruise. I think.
So it's Christopher McQuarrie who came in and did a rewrite of the script.
Yeah.
It's tempting to say that all of the Star Wars stuff was the original writers, and all of the you know, super contemplative fatherhood stuff was Christopher McQuarrie, but that's not really fair to anyone involved to just assume he did the best stuff, even though but it is, I think one thing that does help it is the post Maverick death sequence when he is landed, he incredibly vulnerable as they're shooting up the ground, and then Rooster turns up and saves him. And it was a sequence that I was thinking, man, it's going to be very difficult for them to play this in a way that I don't completely disengage from a level of like suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Because what happened with me with Fallout, the ending of Fallout, is that there was such a lack of like physical risk because it was so after a while it was just like one helicopter fell on top of another one and then he jumped on the other. I'm just like, okay. Like it started feeling video game-ish. And this one, the fact that a level of unrealistic coincidences happen which allow them to escape from the enemy camp, which would happen if you were in purgatory. I'm just saying. I don't actually think this was purgatory. I think this is more like the Book of Job. But anyway, it's
it's a good point.
Yeah, it's you've got like a big the scenes in heaven at the beginning of the movie, and then everything else is in this slightly weird, unrealistic debate about the meaning of life for the rest of it. Anyway, no, and then the curtain's drawn back at the end. Okay, that's definitely not a.
This movie could have used a really pretentious curtain draw finale credits.
The curtain draws at the end, and then like, what did we learn? And Iceman walks out, because he's the god figure. No. Anyway, this is all very problematic, and I've completely.
We're just gonna staple the end to Inland Empire to it. It's gonna turn into like a complete. It's gonna just go completely off the rails. Why not?
Yeah, well, I think again, like while objectively, from a practicality point of view, Tom Cruise escaping from the enemy camp in an F-14 makes no sense. And he goes down the taxi and goes over a tanker, and then there's all this stuff. Like, it's just so much fun, and. It also lets him kind of echo the moment he had with Rooster earlier. Rooster's like, you would do this risky maneuver if I weren't in the plane, wouldn't you? So he has to risk Rooster to get out too. Is that there's also a nice like final actually him fully committing to risking somebody else's life, that he's making the sort of decision that a commander makes in that role, which requires a sort of emotional detachment, but also a level of trust in the other person and an ability to let go and say, if this other person dies, it will not be my fault and it will be okay. Like, that's kind of him getting over Goose seriously and forever. Yeah. That's a nice moment. Yeah. Plus just like I was on board with all of the comic beats in that. I love the bit where he runs and like slams into Miles Teller, who said that he was not expecting that to be a stunt, and then he realized that Tom Cruise doesn't do things by halves. It was funny. He said, that guy's really strong, and I just wasn't seeing it coming. So he just really got the wind knocked out of him. I think it was hilarious. Then the whole why did you do that? I saved you. You told me not to think. And then there's really nothing you can say to that. So. A moment of Tom Cruise facing the consequences of his actions. The consequences right there. And, by the end of it, it was a little bit predictable. I was like, okay, Hangman's going to come save them. I can feel this coming. But, it was also really nice that Hangman and Rooster they got over it at the end of the day, is that it wasn't like this completely toxic relationship, clearly. Is that at the end of the day, Hangman was able to tell Rooster when he was leaving, good luck. And when they came back, they were able to, shake hands as friends. Is that as heightened and to some extent, I think in certain scenes of the movie, over heightened as those conflicts were, they do dial it down at the end in an important way. And they say, okay, no, these guys are actually still adults. They're not just going to go and sob in their pity party and feel unappreciated because the other guy got some glory. Like, these are guys who were able to rise above that. So that was nice too. Anyway, I just wanted to talk through that sequence because I had a lot of fun with it, and I have nothing really to add, but it was fun.
Agreed.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is that we haven't brought up was that when I did my review of it, I compared it a little bit to The Right Stuff, both the Tom Wolfe book and the film adaptation by director's name I don't remember here. Where obviously that movie, it's a lot closer to the original Top Gun than to the current version, where so much of the ethos of being an Air Force pilot is this idea that of this combination of bravado and talent, where you have this constant drive to constantly be moving up the pyramid and constantly be moving up to a better version of yourself, and it's kind of absent here. So I kind of agree with Ethan that if you want to talk about like this film as like the feminine version of the original one, that read is definitely there. If you want to talk about it as, you know, militaristic, that's definitely there. But it's at the same time though, I think this is such a head and shoulders above everything else that's happening in the film industry right now that, you know, it's like we keep going back to. It's perfectly fine the way it is. So even if we want to, you know, nitpick it to death for not being conservative enough, but.
Well, I mean, I think the Right Stuff comparison is good. The Right Stuff is obviously a better movie, but it's kind of like, you know, obviously.
This is like, right. The Tony Scott comparing the original Tony Scott movie to The Right Stuff is like, you know, highbrow art to like dude bro, you know, movie. It's like it's mostly just a attitude they both have. It's not really any sort of like writing comparison, but it's just that you know, the original Maverick felt a lot more earnest to the Tom Wolfe idea of The Right Stuff, where you have to, you know, constantly be in competition for each other, and it's kind of gone now. But
yeah, and that ties into some of my earlier complaints too. I also think there were two things, and before we go, I just want to mention these real quick. The Joseph Kosinski, you know, two of his other movies kind of displayed thematically things that I liked a little bit better that I wish had been more present here. Obviously, I've kind of over talked about the sacrifice part of things, but that's really present in his movie Only the Brave. Have you guys both seen that?
I haven't.
So it's about firefighters, essentially, like wild firefighters. I forget the proper name for them. So I don't want to spoil anything.
Is that a Josh Brolin movie?
Yeah, Josh Brolin's in it. Miles Teller's also in it.
Okay.
Really good movie, and that has the whole ending is thematically about sacrifice to a certain extent. And then it's not a good movie at all, really. A guilty pleasure movie for me. But the movie Tron Legacy.
I love it. It's not good, but I love it.
Well, the music is awesome. But before I saw Top Gun Maverick, I was really hoping it would have more about the reason, you know, you would need humans versus, you know, drones, computers, because I think there's a really good argument to be made there. An argument that he was kind of making to a certain extent in Tron Legacy, as silly as a movie as that might be. But, you know, all that's kind of missed opportunities and stuff that may have made the movie less successful. So there's that.
Yeah, I feel like that probably the argument throughout that a human is going to focus on bringing people back is about the most they dove into that. But I think they were also, the Army was still not wanting to overpromise to young people, saying, we right now, but we will not need you like 20 years down the road, which is a weird and cynical kind of takeaway, but like probably also realistic.
Yeah, a guy who follows Titus a lot, when he posted that my article mentioned that as well. So and
that's
I think
the idea. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I mean that's a good point. It's also like I don't think they're really seeing recruiting numbers go up a lot in the wake of this movie, and I've seen some people kind of confused about that in military type circles. But if that's the message they're giving, is we might not need you, why in the world would anybody sign up? Just like we don't really know for sure why Rooster signed up other than following his dad. I mean, it seems like there's not a lot of reason for young people to sign up to be in the military these days.
Free college. You
get free college.
You pilot a drone and you get free college. That's about it. Anyway, I guess that's a good note to end on. You both want to shout out where people can find all your stuff, because I know we're all over the internet nowadays. So, someone go first.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you can follow me at Hannah Grace Long. Pretty much links to everything else are on there. I also write for the Dispatch and Angelus News, and then hopefully for Plow soon. I've got a piece coming out.
Ooh, nice.
Soonish about The Quiet Man.
Nice. Oh, great movie.
Thank you. There are many people who don't think that, and they're all
really
wrong. That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, no, The Quiet Man is. If I made a list of 100 favorite movies, that might be in there. Yeah, that's a great movie.
The brawl alone, it justifies that movie's existence.
Yeah, I also love the short story that it's based on, but the movie is better. John Ford's film. You can find me at I gather a lot of my stuff on Twitter, kind of like Hannah was saying about the way she does things, at a heavy metal pin, and then also I gather a lot of the stuff I do at my website, theflummoxed.com. Then I also write a little bit. I've been writing a little bit for the Dispatch. Probably going to write a little bit more for Postmodern Conservative and a few places like that.
I just realized I misquoted one of you as a Bulwark writer. I was thinking of Bill Ryan when I said that, so I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I haven't been writing for the Bulwark.
I was like, wait a minute. One of the... I was thinking of another guy I interviewed 6 months ago. Oops. Anyway, thank you so much for both coming on. I appreciate talking to you both again.
It was a pleasure.
All right. Always. Have a good night. The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.